Good day, everybody. Welcome to All About Startup podcast series. Each week, Peter Nicol and I will chat with people who are influential and involved in the startup arena. Peter, who have we got on today?
Thanks, Howard. So this is going to be interesting because today's conversation is based around our topic of HR in the startup arena, and because we have an amazing guest today and a very good friend of mine, I'd like to introduce you to Robyn Davies.
Hi, Peter and Howard. Looking forward to today.
As we are as well, Robyn. Thank you very much. So Robyn and I were first met many years ago when I was looking for a fractional HR specialist to help me with a startup I was involved with. I'd met Robyn previously when he was in a senior position at Newbridge Networks, and I saw his expertise at first hand. So I thought, this is the man we need. So let me share with you a brief bio on Robyn. Now, I would describe Robyn as an inspiring HR professional who has a wealth of experience working internationally with some incredible companies across many sectors, including startups such as Concerto Software and Riverstone Networks, which were both B2B scale-ups and went on to be successfully acquired. Robyn is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, an innovation fellow at Cardiff University, and an honorary professor at the University of Wales. Robyn has been the startup founder of an international HR company, growing it to 7 figures before it was successfully sold. Robyn, I am delighted and honoured to welcome you to the All About Startups podcast series.
Thank you ever so much, Peter.
Robyn, an impressive career indeed. Tell us a bit about yourself and how your journey began.
Yes, thank you, Howard. So my first degree was actually in occupational psychology. When I qualified, I went to work in the NHS, where I did my HR experience and professional qualifications. But I felt like I wanted to get closer to the business. So I did a health MBA and ended up working in general management. I became a general manager of surgery, managing about 600 staff and a multi-million-pound budget. But after my MBA, I also got a hankering to work in the private sector. And I was fortunate enough to get HR director post for Europe, Middle East and Africa at Newbridge Networks. When that was acquired, I went to work for probably the biggest telecom manufacturer in the world at the time, Lucent Technologies and Bell Labs. A fantastic time there. And after that, went to start my own company at the dot-com bubble burst. And we grew that to a multi-million-pound organization over the next decade. And then I exited from that. And over the last 10 years, I've been doing HR consultancy, and my other passion, bringing in HR consultancy, health innovation, across the NHS, academia, and the business world. And that brings us up pretty much to today.
Thank you for sharing that. So you say bring us up to date. There's no two ways about it. The world has changed over certainly the last 4 years, and obviously more recently since COVID and the startup funding challenges that we're seeing today. It feels like we're at the moment in constant permanent flux. I'd be interested to understand your perspective on how these turbulent times in the startup arena has affected HR's position and shaped the activity that we see today. Do you have a perspective?
I think so.
Will this change as the economy becomes and starts to recover?
Yeah, two things, Howard. I think with a 30-year career, we've all seen some of the big changes. The dot-com bubble changed things massively for the telecom manufacturing sector and the technology sector, and then the financial crash in 2008. And in HR, you know, the boom and bust is recruit and then obviously downsizing companies. So we've seen that, but COVID has probably been multi-generational change in working practices, and I think to an extent, it's brought the rest of the world back to where a lot of the technology sector was probably 25 years ago in terms of the way we can work using technologies. In terms of turbulence, I think when the dot-com bubble burst, my own organisation, we shifted to work with the defence sector. And I think for startups, there are still huge opportunities in the health tech arena, AI and fintech. So although times turbulent, certain sectors are also areas of great opportunity.
Great, Robyn. That's really helpful. So during this time, you've worked with many founders and also early stage scale up leaders. How would you describe your ideal profile of a founder?
I think three things. Someone with a purpose and a passion. They've got to have real expertise in their chosen area. And the third thing is emotional. For me, is emotional intelligence along with a plan. So those are the three things.
Okay, and their skill set and knowledge base. I mean, how much of how key is this in your opinion?
I think it's very key with a startup. There's a there's an expertise and there's a gap in the market, and I think for me again is that plan is crucial. That they have some planning. Otherwise, they won't be successful.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Robyn.
So let's talk about life balance that we hear so much about. How much of employee expectations on life balance and work changed over the last couple of years? Can you give us some examples of this?
I think many people have forgotten. A lot of people were laid off, furloughed during COVID, and I think it was a time for a lot of people to reflect on what they actually found important in life, and certain health and well-being and quality of life, I think, rose to a lot of people's agenda. A lot of people have never had such time off before in their working lives. So I think that was the first thing. And I think that a lot of the world, particularly the public sector, caught up with the tech sector, which had been using technology probably for 25 years to be able to work remotely in hybrid ways. And I think there was a lot of catching up. So I think the world has caught up really with our technical enablement. And really, they don't want to go back to that previous way of working. And that's a struggle for some organizations and old thinking. So I think what we're seeing now with certain the knowledge-based jobs is that hybrid working is probably coming out as the most productive. So that's my take. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way we were before COVID, except obviously for hands-on jobs.
Okay, so you believe that hybrid is the way forward, and that's what's going to be that's what's going to be adopted by organizations.
I think so, and the research is showing that that's the most productive, actually.
Okay, so on this note, but we're talking about life balance. Let's talk about that phrase that I think, or we think, those of us outside of HR think that HR professionals love to talk about, and that is company culture. So you and I have talked about company culture many times. It's often subjective. I know it's a big thing for you.
It's a massive thing to me. And again, I think working with so many different companies and seeing the best and the worst, you really realize just how important company culture is. And it's something that doesn't really have to cost anything. So for startups, it's a no-brainer. So it's probably one of the top of my lists for a strategic HR person to get involved in.
I completely agree. So tell me your definition of culture, in this case, in a startup organization.
I think the reason I love startups so much is because they have an opportunity to have a great culture, simply because it's the size that they've got. But also, as long as they can become values based, and again, that's easier when you've got a smaller group of people. You can share the values, literally working in the same room. The pace is faster. They're often more focused, so you tend to know what each other does. And I think there's more opportunity for trust, flexibility, and innovation. So I think there's some of the key ingredients, I think, for a definition, but also the ingredients of a good culture in a startup organization. And on the what doesn't it have is perhaps the bureaucracy and the politics that perhaps larger organizations end up suffering from.
Okay, so that's the ideal scenario. What can go wrong? And if it does go wrong, where does it normally go wrong?
I think as organizations get a little bit bigger, they don't probably invest enough in their organizational design. They tend to, perhaps take on people that in the recruitment process that they don't really put through vigorous selection criteria. Someone's available and they hire them. So probably one of the worst things that happens is you hire the wrong people. I think the next step is things don't go right or don't go as planned, and people react then. Senior people react. They don't keep a steady nerve. They abandon their values and their principles, and then the culture starts to change. So it perhaps goes to a low trust organization. Keeping a steady nerve, keeping hold of your values, and that's the main reason I think the team starts to sort of disintegrate, and obviously energy goes into the wrong places.
So how quickly can this happen? And what's your experience of this?
I think it can be literally the hiring of one wrong person in a senior role can completely change an organization. And it can happen literally in months. And it's like the scenario with the boiled frog scenario. You just don't know it's happening sometimes because it's happening slowly. So it's a mix between the two things. The actual reason for why it can happen is quite quick. Noticing it can be quite slow.
Interesting. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's really helpful. So imagine it's going well, and everything's is working well, but you've also, I'm guessing, have walked into an organization where you've identified a toxic culture, and as the lead for HR, how do you combat this?
I think it's very easy to see and identify usually the culprits of a bad culture. The obvious one, an example of a very senior manager who's a bully, and you can see that quite quickly. Not necessarily a poor performer, but that person's got to be identified, either retrained, show them a better way, or you have to let them go.
Okay, so let's talk about the people. Okay, what are your thoughts as a founder, HR director, needing to bring in additional resource? What's your view on talent acquisition?
I've become more and more clear as I've become more experienced. You need to find good investors, and good investors will insist on the best recruitment. If they're not doing that, they're not good investors, and they're not ones to partner with. We call it executive search and selection. Some people call it headhunting. For key posts, you need to be planning for that, and to do that, you need the right partners to make sure you've got the funding to do that.
And you've hit the nail on the head. You know, you need the funding, you need the budget to get it right. And so many people, I think, over the last couple of years have, you know, hired and ended up with mishires and bad hires. One of the ways they can combat this is to use, you know, psychometric tests. What are your thoughts on that?
Psychometric tests are really useful, but they're only part of the solution. Working with a really good executive search associate is essential. And I know the associates I work with, they'll probably ask you in the range of 100 to 150 questions to actually make sure that that they are finding the best person from the best place. So that investment is critical. Psychometrics are really useful not only for the selection to see if the fit's right, but take, for example, if it's a fantastic sales director, for example, someone like Peter, you can look at predictive psychometrics, not from personality, of their likely success. So everything you can do to reduce your risk of getting the wrong hire, is key. And if you take a sales director as probably one of your first key hires, that is a make or break hire. You have to invest significantly on that, and not hire a friend of a friend, because that's, you know, if it's a good, again, venture capital investor, they will insist you do that. Okay,
so the key takeaway here is to find a good partner who can actually do that headhunting, do that talent acquisition, and ideally to reduce the risks involved, whether or not it's, you know, somebody who's going to bring in a toxic culture, but to find somebody who's actually going to stay longer and deliver and be a good hire.
So you've now identified the right people, gone through the psychometric test, you've recruited the people. We all know that onboarding is crucial. I think I read recently that that onboarding boosts retention by about 82%. But we also know that a lot of companies really don't do this. What in your opinion goes wrong? Is it HR dropping the ball on this, or is it just because it's just too much effort for organizations? So what's your thoughts on onboarding?
So I think it does go back to that step I just mentioned. If you've got the rigor in your search and selection, the expectations on both sides are much clearer. So I think it goes back to that previous step. I think sometimes larger organizations are hiring as a replacement, and that becomes almost a tick box exercise, and that tick box exercise carries all the way through that life process. There's no energy in that whole process or enthusiasm for, you know, selling and welcoming a person. So I think it goes back to that step of the rigor of, you know, why do you want somebody? What are they going to do? What's their purpose? Again, going back to a sales director role, you know, what's the key performances, the outcomes that they want? What revenue targets do they need to bring in? Is that likely? And on the customers you're targeting, are they really going to make a difference for you? So absolutely nailing that down. When they come on board, then as a startup, you haven't got time. You've got to have someone hitting, you know, literally hitting the tarmac at speed. So the induction process, you've done 90% of the work before they've started on day one. So that's the investment you put into the selection, the search and selection process. It saved you a lot of money when it comes to the onboarding then.
Got it. And do you think this rigor is there for startups?
Absolutely. More so for startups because of the risk with startups. So you really do have to be clear about, you know, what the person you're hiring is going to be doing, how they fit in, and selling that role is much harder than perhaps, you know, if you're selling a sales director role for, say, someone like Microsoft. But then that's going to be, you know, they can have fantastic onboarding stuff, but maybe the energy and the fun, the flexibility isn't going to be there, or you know, or the ownership.
Right. Okay. So after the onboarding side, you've got that employee development as a key part of motivation and retaining people. I mean, they say 68% of employees prefer to learn and train in the workplace, and only 40% of companies use an LMS. But where does this leave startups who don't necessarily have the funding for, you know, a learning management system, or the infrastructure, or the knowledge to provide these sorts of things?
So I think it is different for startups. I think you know, they have a unique position from the point of they need speed to market. So again, coming back to the selection and the recruitment side of things, you do need to hire the best expertise you can, so people you know, are hitting the road at maximum speed with the best expertise, because you don't have time usually. You're after a market. So
So this is more about finding a fully formed person who doesn't actually need too much development moving forward in those early period.
In those key positions, absolutely. In that early period is getting the best people, because of that speed of market. That's why they're different, perhaps, than someone who's a large organization who is actually fighting to maintain their market share.
Okay.
So speed is really important. The
Right.
the other thing I would say, again, in support of startups, you know, most people learn best from doing. I think it's something like 70%. So there's no better environment to learn new things and a breadth of things than a startup. You will have unprecedented access to things you would never have learned perhaps in a large corporate.
Right. I mean, often as a startup sort of moves into the next stage, which is that scale up, you know, they've got a lot more people involved. There are obviously different generational learning techniques. I mean, they say 76% of Gen Z learners think that learning is key to successful careers. What programs and initiatives would you say are the priorities that you've worked well for in the past?
So when you're starting to move from very small scale ups, as maybe as you know, it's almost getting to the edge of a sort of medium size organization, money is still a major factor, and this is where I think learning partnerships really come in, and you get to an infrastructure size where you can start to bring learners on board. So you partner with, for example, a good example for me is the Cardiff Business School. We have some fantastic master's students who do 1 year placements. So you get amazing talent at very sort of affordable prices, with academic supervision, and you're investing in the future person. They might have to go back and finish a project, but if they work out, they can join your team, because you want to build in key areas some resilience, and relying on one person in key posts, which is what you find with many startups. That's a key area.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Robyn, we've seen the two biggest budgets that have been slashed over the last 2 years have been recruitment and training. In your opinion, why does this always happen on a cyclical basis, and how can we stop this happening?
To be honest, I'm not sure we can stop it happening. It's probably the biggest flag for a sinking ship. and you can try and stop it, but I think if a company can't afford to invest in its people, it sees people and the things that are necessary for people, and all the research shows it. They're seeing things as a cost. Their culture's changed, and I think as soon as that culture start to change to seeing people as a cost and the things necessary to produce, I think it's on a downward slope. So things have to change, or it's probably the first flag. Move companies.
Right.
Got it. Mm.
So given your experience within startups and early stage organizations and your wealth of experience in the HR side, when is the right stage to bring in an HR expert within a startup?
I
Do you
think
have a view on this? I mean, it's typically a startup will start off with a founder and then let's say a CEO, and then they'll slowly build up that sort of pyramid. When is the right time to bring that HR person in?
I think the honest answer is as soon as possible. Often the technology startups I worked at, the founder is a technology person. Their focus can be on their product and their technology, and not on the people side. So the earlier they get somebody in who knows about the people side of business, the better.
Right. Okay. And can you bring somebody in too early?
Not the right person, I would say it's got to be the right team of people.
Okay. So we know that HR, Robyn, doesn't always get the kudos it deserves. In some cases, it's treated as a necessary evil with some of the sales force, or even viewed with ambivalence. Do you recognise this?
Absolutely.
And what's your thoughts on this? Do you think this is more prevalent? Do you think perceptions have changed?
Yeah, I think a lot of HR people are by nature, or the organization wants them to be in a more compliance role, where they're almost a transactional police. But the problem with this divorces them really from the priority of a company. So they earn that reputation, that they deserve to earn that reputation in not pushing back.
Got it. Okay. And do you think that this is different for startups, or is it across the board with all different sizes of companies?
I think it's a real danger for startups because they'll probably engage HR probably for compliance to begin with. They'll do it. They'll do the HR bit because they have to do it, because there's a legal requirement to, I don't know, to put a pension in, to someone goes on maternity leave and they have to do something. So a lot of the transactional things that's where they'll start. I'm not decrying those things, but they miss the really important stuff around HR if they just do the transactional stuff.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
In an ideal world, what would you like to tell your 30-year-old HR self?
Oh, that's a great question, and probably quite a difficult one, because my 30-year-old self was sitting on a fantastic beach in Vancouver Island. So I'm sure I probably wouldn't have listened. But I guess the things I've learned from a lot of good people is life is very, very short. So stay healthy and stay happy and work with good people.
And if you could look back over your career and tell one thing that's proved invaluable to you over this time, can you share that with us?
Absolutely. It's work with good people. Simple as that.
Right.
I love it. I love it. Robyn, it has been a pleasure. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you so much for sharing these personal insights. Finally, we have to ask, what's next on your agenda?
I'm going to carry on working with organizations and great associates who are innovative and at the intersection of emerging technology, which I love, and the business of people in the workplace. So that's what I'm going to keep doing.
Wow. Thanks for that, Robyn. We look forward to that, and maybe our paths will cross in the future. Thanks to everybody. We'll see you on the next podcast in a couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll have somebody as interesting as Robyn in a slightly different vein. I hope everyone has enjoyed today's episode. Please send us your comments and feedbacks, and please feel free to share the podcast with other people. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.